Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 129 of Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the third week of August 2024. We're going to talk about updates from the front lines and how Ukraine changes the war dynamics after the start of the Kursk operation. Updates from the front lines. Moscow treats each front as a separate operation, and I'm talking about the Kursk operation and operation in Donbass. In Donbass, the resources needed to sustain the offensive in Donbass over the next few weeks have already been allocated. Moscow is transferring reserves for reserve formations that were not planned to be used for a certain time. In the future, Russian operations in Ukraine will likely slow down, but Moscow will most likely withdraw reserves from all the fronts except Pokrovsk in Donbass to maintain the impression that it can take the city. In Kursk over the past week, as expected, Ukraine's bridgehead has strengthened and expanded. Ukrainian troops remain there and are currently working to crush Russian reinforcements as they arrive to prevent Moscow from establishing a consolidated front. This allows Ukrainian troops to isolate the positions of the Russians rather than attack them directly. The second week of the operation in Kursk has come to the end, and Ukraine is one of the verge of securing an even wider section of the border, a front almost 100 kilometers long. It appears that Russian forces south of the same river are now almost completely cut off thanks to Ukraine destroying several bridges over the river. As Ukrainian troops advance along Moscow's main line of defense, guarding Khlyukovo, a border town roughly the same size as Suja, a Russian retreat north this week looks inevitable. However, this may not do them much good, as bloggers report that Ukraine's 82nd Airborne Assault Brigade has broken east of Korenevo and Tapirin villages, threatening to cut off Russian forces to the area from Rilsk. This regional center also appears to be under increasing threat. The Center for the Defense Studies reports that Ukrainian intelligence groups are setting up ambushes along the highway between Rilsk and Lhov. On the eastern flank of the Salient, the Ukrainian troops advanced a little further than we all expected, taking up positions near the villages of Giria and Bilitsa, although one forward company suffered casualties. Over the past week, Ukraine has widened the breach in the border by 20 kilometers and captured the primary defense line of the Russians built in the area. Undoubtedly, it will become a base for further defense of the territory. Below, in Pokrovsk, in the Donbass region, the battlefield looks completely different. If we set aside the universal difference in the relative rates of advance, then it's clearly bad that the Russians managed to advance another 5 kilometers along the railway connecting Avdiivka village and Pokrovsk. Half a dozen more villages fell in the area, and the enemy entered the E50 highway at the point towering over the town of Seredove. It would be wrong to downplay the seriousness of the situation. In this particular direction, Ukrainian forces losing several settlements every week. The second hottest sector has often been neglected recently, despite the fierce fighting that Ukrainian forces continue to wage. For the part for the past 2 years, Moscow has been trying to push Ukrainian troops away from Volnodakha, a vital logistics hub for occupied Ukraine west of Mariupol city. I would even say that if Ukraine manages to capture the city, then victory is assured. The only reason Ukraine focuses on Takhmak and Melitopol in 2023 is that Volnovakha is quite close to Mariupol and Donetsk and far from Kiev, which makes the logistical balance more difficult. But this doesn't mean that Moscow is not afraid that at some point its forces will collapse here, as happened in Kharkiv and almost happened in Kherson before they retreated across Dnipro River in 2022. Here, Moscow even casually attempted massive mechanized offensive using dozens of vehicles at the same time. Ukrainian troops are withdrawing at a slow pace. The situation is difficult, but not catastrophic. We hope that this front will be one of the first to take advantage of the results of the transferring reserves to Kursk and Pokrovsk. Moscow's results here have rarely matched the costs, and the main logistics highway to the critical city of Vuhledar still needs to catch up to the front lines. However, these brigades have been fighting for a long time and have yet to receive much relief. They have they have to go into operational reserve to recover eventually and hopefully get more advanced gear, which neither of them have enough of given the evident skill. The situation in Toretsk is similar to the situation in Vuhledar, not very good for Ukraine, but quite controlled. Moscow has made more notable progress here, largely due to Ukraine slowly withdrawing its troops behind the main defensive barriers around the city. Since this area is so difficult to protect from planning bombs, and the large urban agglomeration of occupied Horlivka is located nearby, Ukraine, just like in the Pokrovsk front, cannot hold on too firmly to its entrenched positions. On the Kharkiv, Kupiansk, Chasiv Yar, and Dnipro fronts, Moscow is trying to maintain a constant rhythm of offensive operations, which Ukraine mostly repulses without any problems. The intensity of the fighting in the Kharkiv has been most directly affected by the Kursk operation. The reserves that Ukraine, according to some rumors, was gathering for the counteroffensive there most ended in the Kursk region. The Russians appear to be shifting the operational reserves allocated to this front to the east to slow Ukrainians' advance. Although unlikely, technically, there is a risk that Ukraine will break through and attack Belgrade from the Kursk salient. Moscow has to throw all its forces into stabilizing the front line between Kursk and Belgrade, and it's obvious. Fierce fighting is still raging in the Chasiv Yar along the canal to the west, but so far the Russians have been unable to hold more than one bridgehead beyond it. In Siversk, the Russian troops continue to put pressure on the 10th Mountain and 54th Mechanized Brigades and 81st Airborne Brigade on Bilogorodivka achieved only minor success. In Kupiansk, the Russians are still creeping toward Oskol near Pishani, but seem to be mostly stuck there, where Ukrainian forces are firing at them from both sides. Attacks on the Azov front continue, but they are more scattered than before. Most of Moscow's operations in the Dnipro area are aimed to eliminating the little-known Ukrainian bridgehead, which is still held by at least one Marine brigade. Nothing has been heard about a couple of them for a long time, and Ukraine was gathering the third. The 21st Mechanized Brigade has also fallen silent. Ukraine still has 4 to 6 brigades in the reserves that will take part in the battles in September. So the Kursk campaign destroyed most of the illusions of the Western world. And let's talk about that. So, the Kursk operation has been going on over 2 weeks. In the last few weeks, it has been interesting to watch how the American press constantly talking about Ukraine's attack on Russia and the state that it was a huge mistake. Talks designed to stop attack on energy infrastructure have reportedly collapsed, as have any hopes of a negotiated ceasefire in the near term. Suddenly, the Pentagon is offering Ukraine fantastic JASM missiles when it's virtually guaranteed that their delivery will be repeatedly delayed or run into party football again. Well, Ukraine is destroying billions of dollars worth of equipment that the United States would otherwise have to spend trillions on over the next few decades just to maintain or finally utilize. I don't think for a second that the United States has what it takes to fight or win wars. Pentagon, I believe, intends to pretend that this is not the case, and so the point is that the damage done to the Putin's military machine and industry now is a net gain for American national security for decades to come. Indeed, something is changing in Ukraine's strategy in its war with Russia. Yes, all attention was focused on the new Ukrainian invasion of the Kursk region. The Ukrainians appear to be making good use of Western resources, supplies, after Congress finally approved $61 billion in April. It makes sense to spend these funds while you have them, while at the same time trying to increase the pressure on Putin as much as possible and show the West that Ukraine can win with such resources. Perhaps, as in the case of the Kursk campaign, it is about maximizing the levers of pressure on the eve of the US elections and possible negotiations with Russia, given all the talk that Trump presidency will force Ukraine to sit down at the negotiating table. The Ukrainians are also testing the red lines of Putin and the US. So Putin's red lines are about retaliation from his side. So far, he has not done anything special in response to the invasion of the Kursk region, and the red lines of the United States regarding the use of American weapons to launch long range missile strikes on the Russian territory. It seems to me that the Western allies are now adopting Putin tactics of plausible deniability and allowing the Ukrainians to get off the water dry as much as long as they can. As for Putin, his failure to respond seriously to the Kursk invasion. Is he waiting for Trump's victory and doesn't want to rock the boat until the moment because a full scale Russian attack on military civilian facilities could lead to a humanitarian disaster in Ukraine, because of which Trump won't even be able to sit down and negotiate with Putin? Or perhaps Putin is similarly worried of upsetting potential President Kamala Harris too much and risking President Harris doubling down on support for Ukraine. In just 2 weeks, more Russian lands are under control of Ukraine that Putin army managed to capture in Ukraine since the beginning of 2024. As of today, Kyiv's controlled 100 settlements in the Kursk region, which is 1,300 kilometers of enemy's territories. Kyiv's summer offensive caught the Kremlin off guard and changed perceptions of a war that many believed was slowly but steadily moving toward Russia's inevitable victory. Rarely in the history of modern wars has anyone from the military managed to pull off such a stunning surprise. Since the Kursk operation began in August 6, it has occupied the center of international headlines and is one of the main news stories around the world, everywhere except Russia itself. While the world press, with bated breath, reported the first invasion of Russia since World War II, the Kremlin controlled Russian media were instructed to play down the significance of the Ukrainian offensive. The Kremlin dictator has remained remarkably silent on the Ukrainian invasion and limited himself to only a few public statements. Notably, there was no attempt to rally the Russian peoples against the invader or to make a historic high profile statements by playing to the public, something Putin usually prefers. On the contrary, he chose a strikingly low key approach. Putin initially called the invasion just a large scale provocation as and has since called the advance Ukrainian army as terrorists. Despite the deliberate show of indifference, there are many signs that Putin is actually extremely alarmed by the Ukrainian invasion. His apparent disdain for the past 2 weeks as he listened to Russian military leaders report false victories on the battlefield has been the source of numerous memes. There is nothing new in such behavior. Indeed, Putin has long been notorious for the disappearances during national crisis, and he reinforced this unwanted reputation with numerous disappearances during the invasion of Ukraine. However, the unprecedented nature of Ukraine's counter invasion makes its recent stance particularly revealing. The Russians' vogue reaction to the Kursk offensive in Ukraine can be at least partly explained by his sincere shock at the completely unexpected turn of events. But perhaps he also concluded that the current military situation left him virtually no choice. The invasion of Ukraine showed that the Russian armed forces are dangerously overstretched, with his army outstretched and advancing with heavy losses in eastern Ukraine. Putin has no significant reserves to call upon and is reluctant to commit his best units to the defense of Kursk region. Instead, he tries to fill the gap with a motley crew of conscripts drawn from across the Russian Federation. Faced with the choice between conquering Ukraine and protecting Russia, Putin cannot choose either, as is becoming increasingly clear. Under the current circumstances, the Russian ruler might believe that the best option for him is to reduce the Kursk operation of Ukraine to the level of the border riot and pretend that there is nothing to worry about. With the help of the powerful propaganda machine, this approach can really prevent the spread of panic inside Russia. But even in this case, it is impossible to avoid the fact that by occupying more than 1,000 square kilometers of Russian territory, Ukraine dealt with a serious blow to Putin's image as a strong leader and made a mockery of Russia's claims to the status of military superpower. If the situation doesn't change, it will be also fatally undermine his ability to intimidate the international community. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, share with your friends.